Well, everybody, I think we waited now for 2 minutes. I think we are ready to start. People will join us during the way. So let me start. Welcome to the RNW Inspiration Session, Building Adaptive Leadership for a Complex Media Landscape. My name is Boris van Westering, and I am Senior Innovation Manager at RNW Media, and I will be hosting today's session. The inspiration sessions are organized in the framework of our programs right here, right now too, and Masaruna, and the outcome of these sessions, guided by your input, are going to help us shape our new digital media leadership course, which will be launched in 2026. Pour ceux qui sont francophones, il y a traduction française, so you can switch to French on the translation button. And if you have questions during our inspiration sessions, put them in the chat or comment, and we will try to get back to you as soon as possible during the session, or we will get back to you after the session. Today, I welcome two great experts in the field of change management and digital media leadership, who will guide us into the theoretical framework of change management, combined with lived experiences of leadership and change management in the media sector. First, I welcome Jelena Hachovic, change management specialist and co-founder of Felix Group. Jelena worked as a media professional and change manager together with multiple media organizations in the Balkans. And Jelena will kick off our sessions with a short masterclass on practical leadership and change management concepts relevant to the digital media sector. Welcome, Jelena. I will also welcome Rachel Akidi Okwir. She is with us today, and Rachel is a real digital media leader. She founded Rebull Consult and is senior editor and leader of strategic communications, expert in the African media and international media. And Rachel has a long-lived experience with the BBC Media World Services in multiple leadership positions. Welcome, Rachel. Before we start with your contributions, Jelena, let me ask you both, what are now characteristics of digital media for the future? Like, what are the leaders of the future? Rachel, maybe you could start.
Yes. I think for me, one of the main characteristics is really bold leadership. And someone asked me that question recently, and I said, and he wanted to know exactly what I mean by bold leadership. And by bold leadership, I mean, the courage to start reimagining the newsroom afresh from what we know. I met a journalist from Zimbabwe a few months ago who told me, they've never had a newsroom. They just have a WhatsApp group. That is a new way of thinking. The courage to break down all the traditional silos as we know them and bring some of the core teams, the modern core teams together, the journalists, the product teams, the technology teams, and also the courage to experiment, with different formats, with AI, to test new business models, and not just tinkering around the edges or salami slicing, as we used to call it at the BBC, but having the courage to really disrupt ourselves before we are disrupted. I think most of the media was disrupted by social media, and we need to begin to think ahead, especially now with the advent of AI. But most importantly, one other thing in the middle of all of this, I think, is still having the courage to be empathetic to staff, and especially those who are grappling with all the changes that are fast evolving around them. To me, that is what the leader of the future must be.
Fantastic. Well, we will hear a bit more about it later in your own contribution, Rachel. But I'm fascinated by the bold leadership. Jelena, what is for you old school and what is for you new school?
Well, definitely going back to the boldness and courage that Rachel has been mentioning, I would trust that maybe courage to take time to go slow first and then speed up. That's going back to the traditional and, the old school one. Back in the days when things were not so complex, both in our environments or in our personal and professional lives, we had the luxury to go slow and to think strategically before we make some move. And definitely, be courageous to be comfortable with the uncomfortable, opening up to the conflict, opening up to the different opinions. It's really hard to stay put and to be calm in the midst of the storm. So that's why taking it slow and be courageous to hear what you don't like, that's particularly hard and challenging. We'll be talking more about that. I would say that going back to those basics would be definitely important for our leaders of the future and for all of us as a humanity, I would say.
Oh, wonderful. Well, thank you both, Rachel and Jelena. Rachel, we will come back to you later on in the session, and we will have a Q&A. But first, we will start with Jelena. It is a privilege to have, like on a Thursday afternoon, small kind of master classes on an eye-opening experience, let us say. Let us start with the introduction to let's say leadership and change management for digital media actors. You're muted.
Do you see my screen? Apologies.
Yes, we see your screen, and you can also put it in the presentation mode if you like.
Okay, just give me a second to do that.
Oh, you did it already. Oh,
okay, there it is.
But you can start from the beginning. Yeah, presenting. Yeah, perfect. Well, go ahead.
Thank you so much. Good day from my side. Thank you all for joining us today. And I'm very happy to have the opportunity to talk about my favorite topic, which is actually understanding the nature of changes, because I really trust that that is the core of the leadership skills that we may want to work on and to that actually build on as the leaders of the future and as digital media professionals, because change is the only constant, which is something that we've been hearing all around the clock, and actually understanding what lies behind and what can help us to understand and nurture and move on with that change is something that we will be trying to answer today. I am a certified change management specialist. I'm certified for John Cotter's Institute Change Management Methodology, and it's only one of the change management methodologies out there. There are many, but we will be taking time to dive into this one and actually answer the question why I truly think that it's something that it might help you with your frameworks and with your teams and with your organizations. I am a co-founder of Felix Nova. That is a consulting company part of Felix Group, and we are providing consultancy services in change management, in project management, in digital media development. And I'm very happy to say that I've been serving as a change manager at one of the USAID's projects back in Bosnia and Herzegovina in Europe, where I used to work with more than 10 media outlets for more than 3 years, helping them to both transform their businesses, change their organizations, introduce new tools, try to answer to new needs of their audiences, and practically help them to grow in the fast-moving world. As I said, change is the outcome, but who lies behind this statement? It was actually Benjamin Franklin. He said that when we're finished changing, we are finished. So that is really nothing new. But what is new? How often we need to change? The pace at which we need to move, it's becoming ever more faster, and particularly the complexity of the context in which we're operating. Social context, economical context, political context, none of it is making our lives easier. So that's why we need to start evolving. This speeding up of changes in the complexity of the context started in the Industrial Revolution, and it never stopped accelerating. So that's why we're trying to understand what's behind the change that we can learn more and adapt to. Before I dive into these examples about the methodology, I would like to hear what are your stories of change, and if you can write them in chat, if you have any examples of both successful changes, unsuccessful changes, and then I would ask Tora to jump in and let us know some of the examples so we can understand what matters to you and what are your personal experiences. Both changes can be bigger initiatives in your organizations that are definitely affecting the frameworks of your organizations and teams, but those can also be smaller tweaks. For example, introducing a new tool in your newsroom, introducing a new set of policies and practices that will just digitally transform your business. But what actually lies behind all of the changes and behind all of the examples that we will be talking about today is actually the change of behavior. When we require the change in behavior of people, we need to understand the nature of the change and what's in humans' behavior that is motivating the resistance or the acceptance of the change. So this is really not obligatory. If you would like to share some examples, go ahead and do that in chat. If not, I will definitely be moving on and asking Tora to interrupt me and read up the examples if that's okay. Leading change essentials. John Cotter's methodology is actually lying on a couple of pillars. The first one is, as I understand, understanding the human behavior and our hardwiring to both face the threats and the opportunities. The second is to know how modern organizations work, the big old beautiful legacy of the industrialization, the modern hierarchy that was given to us as a legacy, understanding that the change initiatives and the projects are being cascaded from the top of the organization down to the organization. And the third and most important is to create and understand why is it important to create a big sense of urgency around that big opportunity and have a vision on why we want to change. Taking always the example of digital transformation, it's always important to understand what is it that we want to achieve after our business, after our organization or our team is digitally transformed. Not to do it just, to jump on the bandwagon and not to, to answer the threat of, being a bad organization or an unsuccessful one if we're not digitized. And particularly important, introducing more diverse leadership from more people all across the organization. So jumping in to what is behind our behavior. Two channels recognized by the Kotter's methodology. One of them is called survive, the other is thrive. The first one is helping us to actually scan the threats. And it's the old mechanism that we have in our bodies and in our brains. It's the fight or flight mechanism that has enabled us from, back millennials ago to run from the lion or run to the lion to hunt it, to save our village. It enabled us to practically focus on the problem and to solve the problem. But nowadays we're not being chased by the lion, but we're equally being stressed by the 3 a.m. email that we receive from our HR department announcing some reorganization or something like that. The answer of our bodies and of our brains is the same as if we're chased by a lion, and our bodies are not recognizing that. Understanding these stressors, both personally and both on a team and organizational level, is particularly important for change management and for changes and for change initiatives. If we keep our employees in, and if we just understand and if we don't address the stressors, if we don't appreciate them, if we don't acknowledge them, all of the change initiatives will be pushing. People will be overstressed. They only want to, distinguish the fires and focus on what's the next big problem rather than taking the time, as I said, to be encouraged to take it slower rather than going faster to think strategically and find the solutions there. That's why we want to have this Thrive channel activated enough. I remind you, both of these channels need to be balanced out. For the Thrive channel to be balanced out and to be alive, we have to be open to seek out and to scan for the opportunities. And when we do that, and when we see some progress and some good results out of the opportunities that we're acting upon, our brain and our bodies are filled with passion and excitement, and we can have high levels of energy sustained for a very long time. We are curious, we're innovative, we're able to use the elements that we've come across to in a new and disruptive manner that is practically good for ourselves and good for our organizations. For change initiatives to be successful, we want these channels to be balanced out, but that's easier said than done. How can we calm the overactivated survive channel, both in ourselves and in our organizations? First of all, I would, as I said, take time to take stock of your stressors, both personally and on your team level and on your organizational level. Try to address them without giving, the perfect solution, but only to take time and to listen to them and to take full stack. Sometimes the acknowledging the stress is a good start to be handling the stress itself. Second one is to understand and see where you can remove barriers and remove unnecessary tasks. Now, when we take time to remove some of the tasks from our to-do list on the long run, we are cherished with more time to think strategically and more time and a clearer path to think about the change initiative. You would be surprised on how many things are unnecessary during our day and how many repetitive automative works and tasks can be removed from our list, so-called barriers that we want to remove from our change path. Involving diverse groups of employees would definitely increase psychological safety, a level of trust in your organizations, and ensuring that all genders, all stakeholder groups are equally represented in the talk about the change initiative from the get-go, from the planning stage. Taking the time to acknowledge everybody's interest and everybody's needs in this process is particularly important to introduce psychological and mental safety for the process, having in mind that the context in which we're working will never be easy. How to amplify underactivated thrive. Flood your organization with communication about the opportunities. Make sure to repeat same messages in a different manner 6 to 20 times across different channels. So record that video, record that podcast, create stickers, print out the posters, meet with people one-on-one, meet with people in groups, have an open conference to talk about the changes and about the opportunities that you want to work on, the opportunities that you want in, for example, digital transformation process to be used upon and to be utilized. Make sure to stop and celebrate progress and early wins. This will help you to address the resistance in the long run. And of course, building inclusive leadership coalitions in the planning phase of the change initiative would definitely be something to increase creativity and trust in the process. Understanding modern organizations. Definitely, organizations since the industrialization were designed only for efficiency and productivity and for predictability and for the performance. They were not designed to be agile, able to transform and be answering to the ever-growing complexity in which they work. And you can always see the plans and change initiatives being cascaded down through the organizations. Few people at the top, more often male than female, they provide leadership, and a much larger group of people is somewhere in the middle providing the management. But that's where the point is, understanding that there's a difference between management and leadership. Two different processes, two different approaches, but very important to be, as our Survive and Thrive channels, it's quite important for them to be balanced out. Management, well, of course, the set of structures, policies, and actions that enable some processes and some systems to be working out in different geographical areas and to actually deliver predictable, reliable results. Management is often being misunderstood for leadership when it's driven by the people near the top of the hierarchy. It's oftentimes misunderstood. On the other hand, leadership is helping us to establish a direction and vision for the future of the organization, to understand why is it that we want to change, why the big opportunity that lies ahead of us will be something that our organization needs to strive upon. And leadership is something that is helping people to be aligned around the vision and helping them to be motivated and inspired to act upon those opportunities out there. And it often happens then when leadership is actually emerging outside of the official regular hierarchy. It's usually labeled as initiative, as good management, as high potential. It's not labeled as leadership. And that's why Kotter's methodology is recognizing something that it's called dual operating system. It's actually having the two existing together and working together to have the change initiatives happening and be successful. Official hierarchy, of course, it has to be there because we want the predictable results. We want the system to work. But on the other hand, you have to have the same people that are comprising the official hierarchy working in the informal network that is in behind of the organization. The informal network is actually aligning people around common purposes and around understanding the vision and what they want to achieve with this smaller or bigger change initiatives. So if you can see the illustration on my presentation, from the right side, you can see the nodes in the network working in groups of people in task forces collaborating together. But what's important is to have people both from the top of the organization, from the middle, and from the yes, the finest and most direct levels of the organization working together and bringing in all of their perspectives and ideas and initiatives. It's important not to over-engineer this network if we don't have it in our organizations, and rarely there are organizations that are middle-sized and bigger. They rarely have these informal networks really developed. What's important is to have the leaders who are setting the vision and setting the direction, but have full trust in the informal network that it will find the way to do the work the best way they think that it should be done, without micromanaging and with full psychological safety and with full trust to leave out the solutions and to leave out the work for the people and to figure out how things will be done, not to micromanage and not to make decisions instead of them, which is quite hard and quite challenging. What's important is the cultural shift that we talked about in the introduction of this session. Understanding that we have to grow a culture. Well, we have to. It would be great to grow a culture where volunteerism, initiative, quote unquote, stupid questions, open and constructive conflict is allowed for the organization to be moving on and growing, and to be actually utilizing all the good opportunities and they want to pursue as part of their vision. That's why we need informal leaders, somebody who is outside of the official hierarchy, but has trust of the people, is a problem solver of the team, is a go-to mentor. They are the experienced people who the rest of the team trusts. And most often, those are women who are actually not acknowledged and not part of the official hierarchy. That's why they're informal leaders. But having them in your team is a precious resource for your official non-formal networks to be building around. And this goes without disregarding the form of your organizations. If you're a small team, medium team, bigger team, if you're a startup, if you're a media outlet, whatever the type of your business or the operation or the organization is, I would invite you to pause and to think, who are the informal leaders of your teams? Are you the informal leader? Are you the one who brings on new initiatives and new ideas and has the energy to step up and actually be part of the process and to lead something and to gather people around your idea? Because we all need the informal leaders to be happening and to be nurtured in our organizations, because they are the ones who will enable other people to be motivated by the change and motivated by the initiative, by joining them and creating the network. Actually, informal leaders are super important to address the resistance to change. It's something that is particularly important to understand during the process. If you take a look at the screen in my presentation, you can see the graph that is based on Rogers' law of diffusion of innovation. So if you can see from the left side of this bell curve, you have the smallest percentage of people or your team or your organization, which is like the get-go innovators who want to participate in the change initiative from the start. They need challenge to be introduced and to accept the change. Then we have the early adopters. They need to understand why they need to change and what is the big reason of the organization for the change to be able to stop resisting the change. Then we have the early majority. They want to see the proof. They want to see the small wins. They want to see the small results along the way to be more prone and have the higher propensity to adopt the change. Then we have the late majority. They would like to see that the rest of the organization is highly committed to the change. Once they see that, they will be committed themselves. And then at the end, you have the laggards, the ones that just need time. And sometimes it happens that people who are resisting changes are just not part of the initiative and they just want to leave. And the healthiest reason and the healthiest way for the change initiative for the organization may be just to leave them be and to, go on separate paths, because sometimes not even time is enough, and not even understanding the proof and the commitment and why is it that you want to change will actually turn those people and motivate them to support the change at the end. So that happens all the time. Not all the time, but yeah, most of the time. We have to find the way to resolve those situations. At the end, understanding that actually the managing change and leading change is all about understanding a couple of steps and accelerators that are, as you can see on this illustration, they're gathered around this big opportunity. So fun about this methodology is that it actually enables the cyclical workaround. So you can be in a couple of phases of this change management methodology at the same time, which is cool. But whatever you do, please take time to start from the first one, which is create and understand the sense of urgency. Work on and communicate with the rest of your team. Why is it and why it's important for your organization to change tomorrow, during the next month, during the next 6 months, rather than a couple of years from this moment on. Because understanding the sense of urgency will help your organization to avoid the complacency and to avoid going back to the status quo and actually acting upon that big opportunity. The second step would be definitely finding and building a guiding coalition, creating the diverse teams of the people from all walks of the organizations and from all steps and departments of the organization, and including them in the planning of the change from the beginning. Forming a strategic vision, I've already mentioned. Why is it important to have the big why and to understand what is the future of the organization when the change is happening and when the change is done. Enlisting a volunteer army, having your informal leaders gathering that volunteering army, working on the cultural shift to include more diversity and more leadership from all across the organization. Enabling action by removing barriers. Again, pausing and thinking what are the things that you can say no to in order to clear the path for the change. Generating short-term wins. Even the smallest wins and smallest progression should be celebrated. For example, if we take the digital transformation process, you may have only 2 new teams that have started collaborating together, and they were working in silos. They were not connected before. That should be also acknowledged and celebrated as a small win because it is important for the process. Sustaining acceleration is all about communicating. Yeah, as I said, communicate something 6 to 20 times across different channels to make the momentum ongoing. Instituting change is all about ensuring that the change sticks in the organization, and actually that you have policies and practices and formal confirmations that this new behavior is here to stay, to ensure that it is part of the organization now. And the last but not the least, and I will end with this, once you're finished with one change initiative, whether it's successful or unsuccessful, the best thing you can do for your organization and for your team is actually start another one and another one. And this will keep definitely the increased adaptability of your organization. And with this here, I will stop and go back to Boris to introduce Rachel and tell us more about what she thinks about these concepts and how she has been practicing them throughout her experience.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah,
I'll
Jelena,
stop.
first I want to say that I celebrate your presentation because it is extremely difficult to do a presentation out of your own home, talking to people in the digital space without any feedback. But the feedback so far are very positive. So people are very, very enthusiastic of these concepts, and I think thank you so much for giving us this overview. I will later ask you, Jelena, maybe you can think already about it. Which do you have a specific case study that has specifically went through a very positive change? Maybe you could share later on a little experience that you can share with us. But maybe now I would love to go to Rachel. You have seen the presentation as well. You have seen the concepts. Is this combinable with bold leadership?
I think it is. I think it is. And I've been leading different change initiatives over the years. As you said earlier in the introduction, I was with the BBC for 21 years. And I like to say, I performed almost every editorial role in the newsroom. From a radio producer, I went on to edit, present, report. And I also held some senior roles like senior news editor and head of journalism, which was an executive editor position for Africa. And the experience, in my experience, I led various change initiatives. And first, as an editor for a radio program called Focus on Africa, we were transitioning from radio to a multimedia team, introducing social media. And I think this was probably my first real change management experience. And we managed to grow, the handle at BBC Africa into a significant brand. But it wasn't easy. And I'll get into that in a moment. And then I also led the launch of a town hall debate program called the Africa Debate, which was also exciting because we were launching something new rather than changing something. And then I moved from London to Nairobi, Kenya, to lead the BBC's 2020 expansion, which was billed as, the BBC's largest expansion since the 1940s. And this was probably my most significant experience because that was huge. And I'm giving you this context because it will explain, some of the experiences that I've had to handle. And when I joined, it was a really small team of about 60 people in a small office in Nairobi. And my role as the head of the region included leading the migration of the existing teams into a new state-of-the-art office, and then launching 3 new digital first language services for the Horn of Africa, both digital and radio, but were digital first. And then supporting the launch of new platforms on digital, on television, but also modernizing some of the existing services. As you know, the BBC broadcasts in, at that time, 42 languages. And I was leading 6 of those language services, including English, in East Africa. And 2 of them had been around for more than 65 years and were set up as, radio services. So we needed to modernize those services as well, besides launching new output, because we didn't want them to be left behind. And then relocating some of the output from London to Nairobi. So in 1 year, we went from 60 people and rapidly expanded to 300 people in the same bureau.
Wow.
And that became, one of the BBC's largest operations outside of the UK.
Yeah, but
But
Rachel, can I ask you something in between?
yes,
Because you mentioned that you grow that much, right? And
yeah,
you transform from one way of working to another way of working. What has helped you in your leadership, or what you saw in the leadership that will enabled you to take others on board in the change process?
yeah. I think there was something that Yelena highlighted in her presentation, the why. I think for every change project that we had, because I've mentioned several, we had to have a why. And then I would call it the bigger why that brought it all together. First of all, moving into this new facility meant dislodging people who had been seated in this bureau for more than 20 years. And some people had a problem with it, actually. So we would told them, we're expanding, we're going to better facilities, modern ways of working, modern workflows. It's going to be more digital. There will be more opportunities for you to grow, to upskill, and even, move on to different departments if you want. So there would be more growth opportunities for the people. Um, I also told them, we wanted Nairobi becoming a regional center of excellence and a model for how to transform journalism into the 21st century, because the media landscape is, fast evolving. And we needed to modernize. We didn't want to be left behind. I think another thing that and included making them understand the perspective of the landscape. I mean, the audience perspective. The media landscape was changing, technology was shifting, and audience habits had changed. So the competition that we had when I joined, many years before, was not the same as now, because we were now up against, platforms like social media and other new media platforms. And our audiences were also, getting younger in line with, the demographic changes. And evidence had shown from our audience research that some of the radio audiences were falling. And we needed to do something to change that trajectory. Um, and 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 so we made it urgent. We made them understand that this is something that we could not play around with, because if we followed or if we maintained the status quo, then would not have an audience in about 5 years. Would fall off a cliff because audiences were shifting, and so we needed to find a way of moving to where some of these audiences were going. But also, as we had expanded, especially for the services, the legacy services, we had created a lot of jobs, but not many people were able to get the jobs because they didn't have the skills and they didn't qualify. So also telling them what's in for them, the upskilling would benefit them, not just within the BBC, but if they decided even to leave, I think was also something that, I tried to, ensure that people understood. So those are some of the ways I did it, but also we first, of course, like with any change, there's resistance. There will be some people who will, resist change. And, what I learned, from that sometimes is resistance is a source of information rather than insubordination. It's a way of understanding how people are genuinely feeling and also trying to reach out to them to understand what it is they're afraid of or what it is they're pushing back against, because that helps you deal with the blockers and any obstacles that you might need to overcome.
Mm-hmm. Can I ask you, Rachel, you tell it in a way that you were part of as being part of the leader, but did you encounter yourself also this feeling of resistance, and how did you overcome that resistance?
Yes. Yes, this was across the board. I think in all the areas that I worked with, that I worked in, both in London and also here in Nairobi. One of the challenges that I faced, I think, was when you try to change people who have come in as radio journalists into multimedia journalists. That was a challenge because radio veterans, feared losing identity. They feared losing, that relevance. Most of the time they would talk about, the good old days of radio when our programs were quite dominant on the continent. Now, with the new platforms that we were introducing, most of them thought it was, unserious journalism. Why are we getting onto Facebook, onto Twitter, onto these social media platforms? This is like kids play. Serious journalists are on the mainstream media platforms. But what I did was I actually understood, because I'd also been part of the good old days. So I understood where they were coming from. And the difference was I was able to jump and reinvent myself, an upskill, which is something I encourage them to do. So I responded with empathy and also tried to listen to many of them, offering practical support, arranging training and getting them to understand. And one thing I found was if people don't understand the platform or whatever it is you're changing or asking them to work on, they will not follow through. So getting them to understand, having that communication, in town halls, one-to-ones, when people speak out, following up with them and finding out what it is exactly. And one thing I also learned was people resist, and sometimes they might resist as a group, but actually the reality is each of them has an individual concern that may not necessarily be the same as, the entire group. They're all resisting for different reasons. Yeah.
Yeah. You made a comment on empathy and leadership. And it might be seen as a weakness, right? To show yourself as hearing and listening, while people maybe in a specific context demand more clarity and we are going is my way or the highway. So how do you see this combination between empathy and leadership towards a specific direction? Because can they bite each other, or how do you make it work? That's I would like to know from you.
Yeah. I know some people say it's a weakness. I actually think it's a strength, because when you empathize with people, people feel heard. And it doesn't necessarily mean that by speaking to them and hearing their point of view, I will, change the whole process in their favor. Because sometimes if a decision has been made, it's strategic, and this is the direction we have to go, then that is the direction we have to go. So but having that ability to listen out to the people, hear their fears, hear their views, I think is very important because they feel at least they've been heard. And what I found was, even during the consultation processes, because sometimes we consult and it doesn't necessarily mean all the feedback we get is going to be taken on board. And there's some people who get offended by that, saying, you asked, but you didn't do what you had asked us. Give whatever feedback we gave you. And there are many strong reasons why that might not necessarily happen. But I think the majority end up feeling like they've been heard and they've been listened to, even if you do not necessarily take some of their views on board. And what I found is it also helps lead to the buy-in as well, because they feel you understand them. They feel you understand their place. Even if they're resisting, they'll feel at least this leader gets it and has explained to us also from, the other perspective. So I found it easier to be empathetic, to talk to people, to get their feedback, understand their fears, and then, make decisions after that. Yeah.
Rachel, I believe you have something to show also in the meantime, but I will ask Jelena. I put you also on the spot with the question: what was now this, or where did you see the change happening in a very positive way, where you could say like, hey, these were the elements that really made the change that was needed. So could you comment very shortly when?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's actually the example of a small local and regional television station with whom I used to work in Bosnia and Herzegovina in Europe. So they wanted to digitize their business, of course, but they wanted to first start with digitizing their archive. So they had a huge video archive, and the tagging system was a mess. So everybody were entering video material and video archive, and they were tagging the material as they seemed fit. So it was not a system. And when you wanted to find something and when you wanted to dig up something from the archive, you could not find it. You could not search anything because you can search, all day long that small little piece of video footage, but somebody just marked it the wrong way, or the way the logic was different, using smaller or uppercase, and there was no system to it. And the informal leader, the director of the technical unit, he volunteered to create the tagging system that from now on will be used in the future. Once he volunteered to develop the tagging system, he developed the system in which they will use to mark the date of the footage, how will they describe it, what type of letters will they use, how they will mark it. And they also did and volunteered to do that retroactively for all the archive they had. It took time to take care of everything, but it definitely helped them to introduce a new system. Once they did that, they made sure to develop a policy. So it was a rule. This is what we're going to do from now on, and it's a change in behavior that everybody had to participate in. And people were happy to be introduced, and people were happy to contribute to the process, because along the way there were new levels of collaboration that have been developing and showcasing in that particular organization. I hope that answers your question, Boris.
Yeah, wonderful, and wonderful to add this to your presentation, to make it also part of an experience that an organization went through. Rachel, coming back to you and looking at also the background of your pictures that you just put up. Um, what triggered me also a little bit, but maybe you can take back what you wanted to say. We look a lot. Change has to do with culture. It has to do with informal leaders. We also touched upon diversity and in the newsroom, and in incredible male-oriented traditional hierarchies in the newsroom. Do you see there also the relevance of diversity in leadership?
Yes, I think that is also very important in terms of diversity of in leadership. And especially one of the things that I've been looking at and that I found really useful was young people, and bringing young people or supporting young people to make decisions. because we had a very young team. And always used to say I was probably one of the luckiest editors at the BBC because I had a young team and the team reflected the audience we were trying to target. They had brilliant ideas, but we also had very experienced journalists who had been, good at their craft. They've been doing it for, many years, some of them decades, and they're very confident. Um, what the young people brought, obviously, was a completely different perspective and way of doing things. And they understood the audiences that we were trying to engage. In fact, most of them were influencers in their own right because they had massive followings on social media. So they knew how to engage these audiences, which was something that we were struggling with. We were struggling to reinvent, the organization for younger audiences. And yet they were here and were sometimes afraid to even share their views. So, luckily one time a group of them, this was during the pandemic, they organized what they called a hangout every Sunday. It was a virtual hangout where they all got together, to have a glass of wine or a cup of tea. And they invited me to come to that hangout. And that's when I started listening to them and realizing we were sitting on a gold mine and that these people had perspectives and views and on issues that we were doing that could help actually make a difference, including changing the way our editorial meetings were run, thinking about stories in a completely different way. And one of them told me, we're afraid to speak out in the meetings because we fear we might ask stupid questions. And I remember saying, it's those stupid questions that I actually want because the stupid questions challenge our assumptions. We assume everybody knows what we're talking about. We tell stories in a way that is that journalists can understand because we follow the news in a different way from the general public. And suddenly here were people asking us questions about stories that we assume everybody knows about, and realizing actually people don't, especially that audience, that age. So if people in our newsroom did not understand these stories, then what about their counterparts out there, the audiences that we were trying to target. So I found it very useful to have, especially the young people, balancing that agility with, the institutional knowledge of the old guard, the veteran journalists and those who understand the craft. I found that really useful. So when we talk about diversity, I think from that perspective, the young versus old, especially in and experienced in Africa, is huge because of the demographics that we represent. Yeah.
And that was also backed by data, I guess, right? Because when you do the change, you see the traffic increasing and you see that you reconnect with specific audiences.
Yes. So all of that was backed by data, understanding that, the demographics had changed over the years and it reflected the change in our audiences. Most of them were young. The median age in some of these countries is like 19 years old, which is really young, with more than 70% of the population across the continent being under 25. So most of them are digital. They are consuming on mobile. They are not making appointments. They're consuming on demand. So all of that was something that we had to begin to work on and strategize on based on the data and research that had been done. And though mainly, mobile first and video first as well. So those are some of the things that we found where, having this young core of people working really, really helped.
So maybe a question to you both, because and we will also move to almost an end of our session, but I have a question to you both, and maybe to reflect the technology and the speed in which technology is changing is huge, rapid. We don't, it is so mind-boggling what is coming up to us, the potentials, the threats, and the limitations. At the same time, leadership and organizational setups are not as agile, or used not to be as agile as before. So how do you as reconcile that, and how can you help media leaders to speed up their changes and to reconnect with the digital transformations that are out there? Maybe Jelena, you can maybe take this one, and then Rachel.
Absolutely. Thank you. To go back to the design of modern organization, each and every organization has a couple of natural phases through which it goes from. So if you start as a small team, as a startup, there's this informal structure that exists. Everybody is doing everything. There is no management structure. There is no pyramid. There are no official positions and power that is stopping us from the process. And we are adaptive and we're innovating as we go, because that is the only way that the small and the beginner organization has to work on. That is the modus operandi of the organization in the beginning. As the organization mature, they need the formal managing structure in order to survive. They need the formal managing structure in order to be producing reliable results and productive results over the time. So you need some predictability, you need some systems. The problem becomes when this formal hierarchy and this official structure takes over, and where we lose the adaptability and the ability to innovate. That's why the balancing out and the opportunity and allowing this mid state to be happening on is very important. This dual operating system, that I truly believe that it's the only way where digital disruption and digital organization has to work on. Having informal leaders, having the informal structure, at the back end of your organization, but also having the management and the official hierarchy for it to be the pillar of the organization. Hope that answers your question,
Yeah.
Boris.
Yeah, and Rachel, I think we come back to disruption, right? Or what do you how do you how can you reconcile it?
Yes, I think I can just answer that. I think for me, it's really a massive cultural change, because most of the legacy organizations have been built to be massive and big and bureaucratic in every sense of the way. And I think, in some organizations, just innovating or experimenting with something would require like a huge committee to approve before you get there. So that agility for me comes with a massive shift in terms of culture, allowing or creating an environment where people can experiment. And I'm not talking about big time $1 million experiments. It could be really small stuff within the newsroom with people who are creative. Let's try this out. Let's try a new format. Let's see how it works. Let's test it directly with the audience without going through so many approval processes. Those quick tests, and also decision making as well. Because a lot of it comes down to how we make decisions. I think that has to be done very speedily. If we want our organizations to be agile, then we need to make the decisions closest to the people who are doing the work, not 3 or 5 management steps or layers away from that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And now that we are a little bit concluding our session, I know it's painful, and we got very beautiful remarks and of support, and people sharing their own experiences also from Nepal and other places. And I'm really thankful for that. And I hope to come back to you all with a beautiful recording of this session, and also perhaps a handout from the conclusions of this session. And just to give a present back to the community of our people that are listening to us, and maybe others as well. What are for you, let's say, the 2 or 3 main key elements that the digital media leader of the future of today can take along under their arm and say like, hey, I'm going to embrace this the coming months, and I will see the good results of it. So what are your recommendations? Rachel?
Yes. For me, it's being open-minded, not being tied to the way we used to do things, because right now the industry is struggling. It's evolving at a very rapid pace. And I feel as a leader, we need to be open-minded, monitor the trends, see what's happening in the industry, understand how it's going to affect you or how it might affect you, because that's what can help you begin to plan and adopt this change and agile mindset. Yeah.
Mhm. Thank you so much. And Yelena, what are your recommendations?
One thing, if you would like to, as Rachel has mentioned, be innovative and start with some innovations and some experiments and some changes, start where the energy is, or start where the good energy is, rather than addressing the negative resistance and the people who are resisting the change and have lots of reasons of why something will not work. For example, as Rachel said, they're radio people and they don't see that the social networks will be disrupting and changing the industry that much. Start with a little group of people who are accepting the change and who wants to experiment, and focus on that small little groups. Start where the good energy is and then spread out from there. Because if you think about strategically and if you start, working in different areas and different elements and just breaking the resistance, you will lose your energy and you will lose faith and motivation. So start small and start where the good energy is.
Well, wonderful. These are incredible conclusions. It's also a start to think about what does leadership mean in our new context, and also try to give a space to sit down and allow yourself the possibility to educate yourself into these new concepts, talk to people, inspire yourself by people, talk to people like Rachel and Yelena. And this is a nice start of a communication. And we are also extremely happy at RNW and RNTC to be able to have done this session together with you. At least I got inspired by your contributions, and I thank also all the participants in this session. We will make sure that we will make a roundup of all what has been discussed. We will take this on as a valuable contribution to our new digital media leadership course that will be launched in 2026. If you want to know more about it, just reach out to us. And we are hoping to continue discussing throughout with inspiration sessions like this. You can already zoom in next Tuesday on the 2nd of December when we have an inspiration session on AI integration into the newsroom. So Jelena and Rachel, you're both more than welcome to join us as well. But we have two beautiful experts coming and discussing that with us, one from Code for Africa and another surprise guest that I will disclose later on. So please join us next Tuesday as well. Thank you for being with us, and Rachel Akidi Obir and Jelena Hachovic, both for your amazing contribution, and look forward to bring up the discussion again on how we can support each other in making the changes and giving in our quest to stay on top and stay relevant in this beautiful work that we're doing in the field of journalism. I wish you a pleasant afternoon and thank you so much. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Goodbye. Have a good day.